Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Very Cold Lasagna podcast. I'm your host, DylanLasagna, and this is episode number 210 of this icy yet spicy podcast with all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports. And in this episode, we are here to put a bow and to wrap up, like in a little gift box, our 2024 NFL season preview month with the final division that we have to talk about here in this episode, and that is the AFC West. So we've already covered 7 of the 8 divisions that we need to talk about, which were the NFC West, the NFC North, the NFC South, the NFC East, and then the AFC East, the NFC North, and the AFC South. And like I said, we have just one last one to go through, and that is the 4 teams residing in the AFC West. So I just want to take a little bit of quick time to thank all of you that have joined me and listened to me in my previews for each and every team going into the 2024 NFL season, and whether my takes on your team or any of these teams going into the fall were good or bad. I just want to thank you for, let me give you my insight on all these teams as we prepare for another good season of football. I'm really excited as we're on the cusp of even more greatness, potential greatness, or even more ugliness that's to come with the football season, with preseason coming up real soon. I believe the Pro Football Hall of Fame game is this week, and with full preseason action the following week. So I'm excited. I'm excited for that. So that being said, before we get the ball rolling with our final NFL season preview episode, a little bit of training camp updates that I wanted to provide you all. So that being said, there were some contract extensions that were handed out in the past week with quarterbacks, especially Tua Tagovailoa of the Dolphins and from the Packers, Jordan Love. They got some big fat contract extensions, some 4-year long-term deals with their teams. So good for them, I suppose. I know Tua has been asking for one, and Jordan Love, even though he's only started 1 year, he proved his worth, I suppose. But now it's time for him to back that up. So it'll be interesting how they play and whether they live up to those contract extensions or not going into this fall. But anyway, they got their money, they got their due, and now it's on them to try and prove their worth with those contracts. In terms of another contract, Matthew Stafford of the Rams, he agreed to an adjusted contract with the team. So he's essentially going to be earning an additional bit of money over the next 2 seasons, $9 million to be exact. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, in terms of injuries, there were a couple of significant injuries all around the league with training camp. Like kicker Michael Bagley of the Lions, he's out for the season with a torn hamstring. That is unfortunate, but that opens the door for United Football League kicker Jake Bates to get the starting job. But we will see if he becomes the new kicker as the preseason progresses throughout the month of August. Another significant injury for a team like the Dallas Cowboys, they lost one of their edge rushers, Sam Williams, a rotational pass rusher. He's out for the season with the torn ACL. Kind of unfortunate as the Cowboys lost another significant edge rusher in Dorrance Armstrong, one of their starters in the offseason. And losing another edge rusher to injury like Sam Williams, even though he's a rotational player, is rough. And then one more thing to note with some training camp stuff is another injury from the Indianapolis Colts. Samson Ebukam, he tore his Achilles in practice recently. That's kind of a big blow to the Colts pass rush, but hopefully they'll be able to do okay without Ebukam, but hopefully they'll be fine. So that being said, make sure to follow the show on social media, on Twitter and Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna, especially for my filthy casual takes on there as well. And if you're listening to this on audio, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure you rate and review the show 1 to 5 stars. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to smash the like button, smash the subscribe button, and leave a comment down below with your own filthy casual takes on each and every episode topic that I talk about in every episode. And in this instance, it's our AFC West 2024 season preview, and which is the final part of our month-long NFL season preview month. So leave your takes on each and every team that I'm going to be talking about in this episode. And as always, make sure to share this with your friends, share this with a neighbor, share this with a stranger, share this with your colleagues at work, colleagues at school, share this with pretty much just about everyone you want to share this with in regards to the good, the bad, the ugly of Very Cold Lasagna. That being said, let's talk about these teams that reside in the AFC West. So with the AFC West, it's been pretty much run by one particular team that resides in a kingdom, a certain particular kingdom that no one has seemed to figure out. No one has seemed to take down in, what is it? How long has it been? Almost a decade now. Almost a decade since this kingdom has never been topped. So 2023 was pretty much no different for the certain defending division champions, which initially when you looked at it last year, it seemed like someone was finally going to step up because of some adversity, self-adversity that these division champions were facing in their particular kingdom. But that once again didn't turn out to be the case. These particular division champs that have held the throne for the past several years, they once again crept away with the division once again, the AFC West once again. And eventually when they got to the playoff time, they scrubbed away all their problems and reminded everyone once again why this particular team is always on top. You know, they were the mommy of the NFL by winning a second straight Super Bowl championship. So as you go into 2024, the story is pretty much not all that different. Sure, there's a new head coach down in a particular part of California, and is also fresh off of his own championship. However, until that head coach comes that's going into that team proves that they can challenge the reigning defending two-time Super Bowl champions or any other team within that division, in this division, they prove they can hang. They prove that they can topple these two-time Super Bowl champions. I think it's pretty evident that, you know, despite an eventful offseason for these Super Bowl champions, they're pretty much going to once again rule this division, and maybe even more things to come when it comes to playoff time. So that being said, let's talk about this final division, this final part of our 2024 NFL season preview month with our final four teams that reside in the AFC West. With the first of our final four teams in our 2024 NFL season preview month, we go back down to Southern California to take a look at the powder blue side of things as we take a look at the LA Sorry, I have a case of the Clippers. No, wait. This team is called the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers in 2023 were trying to bounce back from the Clipper. Sorry, I still have the case of the Los Angeles Clipper Chargering. Sorry, I have a case of the Clippering with this team. They were trying to bounce back from the Clippering that they had in the playoffs a month prior in the 2022 playoffs with, you know, that game with the Jaguars in that playoff game. So remember when they gave up that big lead to the all-elite Jaguars in that wildcard game in January of last year? So they come into this past season trying to recover from that. But unfortunately, they struggled even more, primarily thanks to very bad coaching from head coach Brandon Staley. And there were a lot of key injuries across the board from the likes of Mike Williams, who was lost for the season, and then they lost Joey Bosa at one point. But the biggest death blow, and I guess the capper of all this, was quarterback Justin Herbert. They lose him in Week 14 in a game against Denver at home to a finger injury in his throwing hand. And, well, the Chargers weren't really particularly doing that well at that point in the season, but it was pretty much essentially the death of their season. And adding to that was a couple days later, losing to the Las Vegas Raiders in one of the most embarrassing losses in their history. And I guess you could make an argument of NFL history as well. So they lose in embarrassing fashion on Thursday night, only on Prime Video, which led to the firing of Brandon Staley and general manager Tom Telesco, which honestly came 11 months way too late, but that's besides the point. So the Chargers end their season at 5-12, and now you have to wonder who is going to be your next head coach for this team. Would anyone want to be the head coach for this team? But even with that, there would always be someone. I just answered my own question. So anyway, they replaced Tom Telesco with former Ravens director of player personnel, Joe Horowitz. A key piece in that organization comes over to the Chargers to try and help this team. And replacing Brandon Staley is a proven winning head coach this time around in the form of someone that no one thought would come back to the NFL, but he has now Michigan head coach Jim Harbaugh. So Jim Harbaugh is fresh off of winning his first and so far now, for now, only college football national championship as soon as the Chargers season ended. So he comes in with a lot of winning experience in college. And of course, back then when he was the 49ers head coach, but that was like over a decade ago. But anyway, he still comes in with, regardless, with a lot of winning experience. And he also has recent winning experience. So for the Chargers, this is a good get for them. But I have some questions later on about Jim Harbaugh when we get there. But still, a good hire for them. But they also traded away receiver Keenan Allen to the Bears in return for a 4th-round pick. So that's kind of a little bit of a blow because Keenan Allen was still their top receiver, but he was getting a little bit older. So some of the other moves that the Chargers made this past offseason, they didn't really lose a whole lot because, well, they got rid of the guys that were getting injury prone, like Mike Williams. Again, lost him to a torn ACL, but he was always getting injured. He moves on to the Jets. Austin Eckler, kind of a productive running back, but also kind of got injury prone too. He moves on to the Commanders. So you try to replace them with guys that are also kind of injury prone too, like J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards from the Baltimore Ravens. They're coming off pretty significant injuries from last year. So you better hope that they stay healthy. Tight end Will Dissly from the Seahawks, maybe someone you can rely on. Center Bradley Bozeman from the Panthers to try and bolster that offensive line. And then defensively, linebacker Denzel Perryman from the Texans. The draft is where they did their dirty work by getting a tackle by the name of Joe Alt from Notre Dame. And then receiver Ladd McConkey from Georgia, so another weapon for Justin Herbert. Defensively, they got guys like Junior Colson at linebacker from Michigan. So Jim Harbaugh gets one of his guys reunited. Defensive tackle Justin Elugbai, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, from Alabama. And corner Cam Hart from Notre Dame, a relatively decent corner. And then also, they got receivers Brendan Rice and Cornelius Johnson from USC and Michigan. So Jerry Rice's son, staying in Southern California. So that's a win for him. So that being said, despite getting a winning head coach in Jim Harbaugh, despite getting these pieces around the offense, I still have some concerns for them. I still have concerns about this team. And that starts with Justin Herbert's weaponry. Because, the good news is, despite retooling the offense, is that his receiving core is much younger. They're much healthy. They seem to be much healthier, and they're already gaining chemistry with each other as training camp rolls along. The bad news is that because you got rid of guys like Keenan Allen, you got rid of guys like Mike Williams, and of course you also got rid of Austin Eckler. Outside of second-year player Quentin Johnson, who kind of struggled last year, and you also have veteran Josh Palmer, they don't have a lot of experience. So, again, the good news is that they're already establishing that relationship with each other in camp. But of course, the end game action is where it really is going to matter for this team. And then the offensive line, it certainly has questions of its own, despite being a major need this offseason. The only thing that they did with the offensive line was through the draft, like getting that tackle, Joe Alt, who is a great blocker. But unfortunately, he has to play right tackle, which he's never done before. So they also didn't address Corey Linsley's retirement. Actually, I'm sorry, I take that back. They did with Bradley Bozeman. But his other running mates, Zion Johnson and Jameer Slayer, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, they struggled last year, and they're going to have to bounce back pretty well after having a very, very bad last year where Justin Herbert got hit a lot. So looking at some of the key games for this Charger squad going into this coming fall, you look at the first game at home against the kind of revamped Las Vegas Raiders, although not really. It's kind of the same team, but just with a different head coach and some questions of their own. But you want to prove if Jim Harbaugh's the man and that can help this team, you got to get a win right out of the gate. And then you travel to Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers a couple weeks later to take on the sort of new look Pittsburgh Steelers as well. And then week 4 is going to be a big test for this team, taking on Patrick Mahomes in the defending two-time Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. So kind of 2 big early tests early on for this team. So speaking of Jim Harbaugh, obviously the biggest question for me, obviously, is what is he going to look like going after he's been away from the NFL for a little long time. The last time he was in the NFL was coaching my team, the San Francisco 49ers, in 2014. So about a little over 10 years. And yeah, things didn't exactly end on the best note for Big Jim in the NFL. But that being said, he has had a very good rep of turning very bad teams into winners in the blink of an eye. Just look at my Niners from those years in 2011 and 2013. And then look what he's done with the University of Michigan since he stepped in in 2015, and then recently last year in his final year, where he finally won the national championship with them in his last game as a coach there. But now, he's coming back into the NFL. What is he going to bring to the table? And what is he going to offer back in the big leagues? You got to wonder what kind of schemes or what is he going to use that he learned it while he's in Michigan? Because what he tried to bring in when he first went into the NFL with the 49ers, it's not going to work 10 years later, obviously. So it'll be interesting what he brings to the table this time around. And then obviously, I think this is a question I addressed last year. Can this team finally break the curse of clip? I still have that case of chargering. So can they break that case of chargering? Because whether it was injuries or blowing leads or just flat out sucking, because it's been going on for how many years now? Oh yeah, too many to count up. The Clippers, the Chargers, they've dealt with all this trauma for the better part of too many years, too many decades to count. So Jim Harbaugh, he's certainly going to have to readjust to the NFL. But maybe he could be the coach that puts an end to all the misery, all the clippering memes for good. But it's going to take one step at a time. So obviously your top goal for this season is to see how this team is going to fare under Jim Harbaugh. Because for years, the Chargers have been, especially since they moved to Los Angeles and be that kind of brother that nobody wants. Sorry to say it. So again, even with the hiring of a winning coach like Jim Harbaugh, I honestly don't expect the Chargers to make the playoffs just yet, but they may surprise me, especially because, they still have Justin Herbert, but they still got plenty of questions around their offense. However, I do hope that, now that they have Jim Harbaugh, they can start the beginning of the end of, this case of that case of clippering in the powder blue side of Los Angeles. And that could start in just a couple months. Moving on from the powder blue side of Los Angeles to the mile high to talk about the Denver Broncos. The Broncos had themselves a very strange 2023 because they had a very embarrassing first month that included a 50-point loss to the Miami Dolphins, but then they followed that up with a very good mid-season stretch that had them in contention for a playoff spot, as well at one point, even the AFC West division, even at a point almost overthrowing the Kansas City Chiefs. Yeah, let that sit in for a bit. But unfortunately, when it came to near Christmas time, Russell Wilson and the offense regressed back to their early season form. And they lost a critical game to the New England Patriots on Christmas Eve. And Sean Payton decided it was time to bench Russell Wilson. It was time to shut him down for the last 2 games of the year for reasons we know now. We'll talk about those reasons in a little bit. As Denver again missed out on the playoffs at an 8-9 record, like they were literally right there, but unfortunately, they decided to can it in the last 2 games of the year. So that being said, the offseason was kind of eventful for the Broncos because we now know why they shut down Russell Wilson, because they've had enough. They were not liking what they were seeing out of their big fat trade that they made 2 years ago, and they were seriously regretting it now. But unfortunately, they paid the price for it. So sure, they ended up releasing Russell Wilson in the offseason. But unfortunately, they're taking a big fat dead cap of him. In other words, they're going to have to pay Russell Wilson a shit ton of money to just be on another team, because that's the price they pay for giving him a big fat contract with so much guaranteed years. So that's the reality that the Broncos are living in. They also traded away receiver Jerry Jeudy to the Browns, but he's been disgruntled with them anyway, and there wasn't really much opportunity for them after he's done after they tried to give him some. They also traded for quarterback Zach Wilson from the New York Jets in return for some draft picks. So it seemed like Zach Wilson was gonna be that next guy that the Broncos were gonna try in how many attempts that we have now with them. So unfortunately, in my opinion, that Zach Wilson, after that bust in the 2021 draft in the years to come, he wasn't going to be that guy for Denver. But who knows? But obviously, if you're the Denver Broncos, even with the acquisition of Zach Wilson, your goal for this year, this coming fall, was supposed to be figuring out your next long-term answer at quarterback. But the offseason provided some interesting answers of how they were going to get to that goal. So looking at some of their moves that they made in free agency, they didn't really lose a whole lot, other than losing a key piece of their offensive line like Lloyd Cushenberry to the Titans, and a kind of key part of their defense in linebacker Josie Jewell to Carolina. And because they couldn't spend a whole lot, and because of Russell Wilson's big fat contract taking up all the cap space, they spent their free agency money on linebacker Cody Barton from Washington. And they also tried to get some kind of reserve pieces like Josh Reynolds from the Lions, and a defensive tackle by the name of Malcolm Roach from the Saints. So essentially, they really couldn't do a whole lot because, well, like I said, they released Russell Wilson, and they're paying the price for it by having to eat up all that dead money, essentially. So they did some of their dirty work, though, in the draft. They tried to salvage that. But then came the controversial decision of getting a quarterback by the name of Bo Nix from Oregon. So I'll talk more about Bo Nix in a little bit, but some of the other moves that they made in the draft was getting an edge rusher by the name of Jonah Ellis from Utah to try and bolster up that kind of weak pass rush. Receivers Troy Franklin and Devon Bell from Oregon and Utah, respectively. And then running back Audric Estime from Notre Dame. And trying to beef up that offensive line again is Nicholas Gargiulo from South Carolina. So going back to that Bo Nix pick in the draft, it had a lot of people talking, whether it was for good or for bad. Because when the draft happened back in April, let's just say that people were really questioning Denver's decision to go and get him, because it was a little sketchy. It was a little sketchy where they got him at, because they easily could have got him in the second round. Like, no one was, maybe out of the Raiders, maybe no one was picking a quarterback by that point, because all the good quarterbacks were off the board already. So while a couple months later, while I am sort of still in that camp, from what I've seen in their OTA and training camp highlights, I at least am a little impressed so far with how he's connected with the rest of the offense. There's still a long ways to go with Bo Nix, but he's doing all right. He's doing okay. He's doing decent with how he's running the offense for Sean Payton. So sure, it was certainly questionable for Denver to use their 12th round pick, 12th overall pick, not 12th round, that would have been too many, on a quarterback when they've already traded for Zach Wilson a few weeks prior. I mean, yeah, I get it. You want to have a quarterback competition, and also you still have Jared Stidham on your team, but obviously they didn't feel confident in Stidham leading the team when he's already done so. But it seems like the decision is okay for them so far, so you can't take that away from them. So looking at some of their key games going into the fall, you start in Seattle, kind of like you did 2 years ago with Russell Wilson, except now you have a brand new quarterback, and you don't know who that's going to be. So then you start your home opener the following week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and ironically enough, guess who's on that team? Russell Wilson. But then again, you don't know if he's going to be starting for that team or playing in a backup role behind Justin Fields. But it'd be funny. It would be pretty funny if Russell Wilson does start that game. Going back to, the place that now everyone will hate him for. And then you go to Tampa to take on the Bucs. So those are kind of three key games to look out for if you're this new look Broncos. So my thing is with this Broncos team, despite, kind of having an kind of team, the biggest thing I want to know with them is, well, where does Bo Nix play? What game? Like, at what point does he play? And when he does play, how is he going to look? Because, like I said, he's a solid quarterback with good pocket presence, and he's smart with the football, and he's had a lot of starting experience. I believe 50-plus games starting in Oregon, but that was in college. I mean, and from the very small snippets I've seen with him, the defense that he played, not relatively that good. But maybe perhaps, he still has all those traits once he gets actually acclimated to the pros and he actually gets starting reps and eventually, those actual meaningful reps. Once the season comes along, maybe he's called into action. But when you look at this offense, it's pretty limited around him other than Cortland Sutton and his college teammate, Troy Franklin. So whoever is at quarterback, especially if it's Bo Nix, you're not going to have much to work with, if we're being honest here. So for the Denver Broncos, they miserably failed with Russell Wilson. And while they at least admitted that, they're heavily paying the price for it with a shit ton of guaranteed years that they have to pay this guy. But nonetheless, Russell Wilson is in the past. They're now starting afresh again in what feels like for the millionth time since when Peyton Manning retired. 2016. They had to hit the reset button on the quarterback position at least a very good amount. So, like I said, they've had to invest so much on Russell Wilson, and now that he's gone, they couldn't improve the roster around whoever's going to be at quarterback, whether it's Bo Nix, Zach Wilson, or even Jared Stidham. There's not going to be much help around them. So either way, I mean, I don't expect the Broncos to do much this season because of that. And their defense, they could try to help, but this year for Sean Payton's Broncos should be about which of these guys could be a part of his vision going forward, especially when he eventually does trot out Bo Nix at some point this year. But in my opinion, expect the Broncos to just trot around for 2024. So moving on from the mountains of the Mile High to the fabulous, the glamorous Sin City to talk about the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders got off to a pretty bad start in 2023 because of poor quarterback play, as expected, from Jimmy Garbage Fail, aka Jimmy Garoppolo, and poor coaching from Josh McDaniels, which resulted in the benching of the former and the firing of the latter mid-season. So once both of those happened, once they did that after week 8, they enjoyed a much better second half, thanks to a very strong defense and a much better coaching effort from their interim head coach, Antonio Pierce, as they finished a second half of the season at 5-4. So sure, they didn't make the playoffs again, but at 8-9, they showed a little bit of promise for what was to come this coming season. So that being said, there are some things to figure out. There's some things to sort as you are going to potentially bring on the coach that really worked out for you in the second half of 2023. That being said, looking at some of their key offseason events, well, they promoted the guy that really helped them get to that good record in the second half of the year. They promoted Antonio Pierce as as the full-time head coach. Mark Davis making the right choice there, but they also had to replace the general manager Dave Ziegler because, well, when Josh McDaniels went, Ziegler also left with his bad decisions. So Ziegler was replaced by former Chargers general manager Tom Telesco, which was kind of a questionable decision considering that Telesco, he was also a part of that, ironically, that 70-point fiasco on the other side of it with the Chargers. But now that he's with the Raiders, it'll be interesting how that turned out. They also released Jimmy Garoppolo and also receiver Hunter Renfrow. And it's kind of sucks with Renfrow because he had those couple 2 years from 2020 to 2021 with the Raiders. But then he fell off, mainly because of injury, which is unfortunate for the guy. So looking at some of the moves in free agency and the draft with this team. So they kind of dealt a big blow at the running back spot with Josh Jacobs. So Jacobs unfortunately decided not to stay with the team. He's moving on to the Packers. So there was a big hole with the running back spot. So that's a little bit unfortunate there. But they also lost a couple of reserve guys like Bile Nichols to Arizona, and on the offensive side of the ball, Jermaine Ellimore to the Giants. But they try to make up for it in both free agency and the draft by getting a key piece of the defensive line in Christian Wilkins from the Dolphins, their top defensive tackle. They stole him over from South Beach and brought him over to Sin City, which is a good move for them. And then they also brought in the backup quarterback from the Colts, Gardner Minshew, to compete with Aiden O'Connell. More on that in a bit. And then in the draft, they got the best weapon available in the first round in tight end Brock Bowers from Georgia. I feel like that is a very good move for them. They could have went quarterback, but I guess there wasn't one available for them. And then they continued to try and help out the rest of the offense by getting another offensive lineman in Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon. And then the rest of the way, it was a mix of both. They got corner Kamarion Richardson from Mississippi State to help out a secondary was kind of 50-50. Linebacker Tommy Eichenberg from Ohio State to help out a front seven that was really good last year. And then to try to beat the running back competition, running back Dylan Lobb from New Hampshire, and in corner Marlon Devonshire from Pittsburgh to, again, help out the secondary. So when you look at this Raiders offseason this past couple of months, I still kind of wonder what the plan is with the quarterback spot. Because on one hand, Aiden O'Connell was very decent last year, and he had some flashes as a rookie, despite the supporting cast, especially up front, was not that great. But at the same time, when he did have some time to throw the ball, time to make some plays, I just felt like something wasn't there, and it wasn't enough to fulfill the long-term starting role for Aiden O'Connell. But then on the other hand, when you look at how the offseason panned out for the Raiders and like the moves that they made, one can argue that they weren't aggressive enough. But then at the same time, it's just like there wasn't really a lot that they could do, especially when the Falcons ended up taking Kirk Cousins. But then he also inexplicably took the best remaining quarterback away from them in Michael Penix Jr., like a couple picks before them. Like I think it was like 5 or 6 picks before them. So the Raiders, they kind of wisely went away with Kirk Cousins because Cousins was coming off an Achilles injury. But then, yeah, there wasn't really much they could do, to be honest with you. So it was more of, well, we just got to take what we have with Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. So they also could have went with Bo Nix in day 2, but again, Denver took that early in the first round too. So honestly, I don't mind it necessarily with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell as stopgaps for this year, but I just hope that the Raiders and Mark Davis and Tom Telesco have a long-term plan next year. Now, unless Aiden O'Connell does somehow take a big step forward, but if he doesn't, then the Raiders got to reevaluate for 2025 at the game's most important position. However, on the opposite end of the spectrum, the offensive supporting cast should be much better, regardless of whoever's at the quarterback spot, because this new Raiders regime, they had themselves a pretty good draft that helped out their quarterbacks, whether it was getting the best tight end in there with Brock Bowers or beefing up some weak spots in the offensive line. The quarterbacks, whether it's O'Connell or Minshew, they'll at least be able to make the most of it, despite their deficiencies, because they got some much needed help. Bowers joining Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers, gonna make for a nice passing attack, just as long as the quarterback takes advantage of it. The offensive line starting to have plenty of potential with the likes of the people that are already there, like Andre James and Dylan Parham. And then you bring in a guy like you bring in a guy like offensive lineman Jackson Powers Jr. And you got yourself a pretty solid tandem in up front to protect your QB. So this group makes it one to watch. Again, it's just a little unfortunate with their quarterback situation. So looking at some of the Raiders' key games this season, you start out in Los Angeles to take on the Chargers and their new head coach, Jim Harbaugh. So kind of a test for both of these teams, but more especially the Raiders as they kick off the Antonio Pierce era fully. And then you go, and in a couple weeks later, you have your host home game against the Carolina Panthers and Bryce Young. That's kind of a little bit of a test there, but you don't really know what to expect with the Panthers team still in rebuilding. And then the big test for you comes a week later against a tough Browns defense. And, well, honestly, something that you don't really know what to expect with Deshaun Watson and that side of the ball. So if you're the Raiders, your goal for this season, yes, you have all these pieces, on defense, but some questions on offense. But nonetheless, you did pretty well for yourselves. You almost got to the point of earning a playoff berth, but we're just a little bit short. So your goal for this year should be to try and earn one, to try and earn a playoff berth, regardless of the deficiencies at the game's most important position. So speaking of which, who's going to be the starting quarterback for this team? Gardner Minshew, a solid backup that nearly guided the Colts into the playoffs last year, if not for that one drop, if not for that bad pass. But you also have Aiden O'Connell, who was decent last year, despite a very limited supporting cast, but now he has a much better one. They both have their flaws, but they do have some positives in them. And, well, someone has to take the starting role. And Antonio Pierce came out recently saying that someone's got to step up and take it. Someone's got to have that edge in them. And I think that edge could likely go to Gardner Minshew when it's all said and done come September. And then for Antonio Pierce, how's he going to fare in his first year as a full-time head coach? Because once Antonio Pierce took over from Josh McDaniels, the Raiders went from 4-5 to 5-4. That's like a reverse turnaround. And that include that 5-4 record, that 5-4 stretch, includes a 3-1 division record in the AFC West, and that one of those wins was a Christmas Day upset over Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. So that was their biggest highlight of the year. So yeah, teams are likely to catch on to Antonio Pierce now and how he coaches this team, but it'll be interesting how he adapts to games now that he has the Raiders under his full grasp. The Raiders, they had a promising finish to their 2023 season, and they still have an uneasy quarterback situation with who's going to start with between Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. But they actually figured to be in pretty solid shape this coming fall. They still have a strong supporting cast on the offensive side of the ball, and their defense is still very, very tough. It can be like an X factor in their games. They do have some tough opponents on their schedule because, well, it's a very tough AFC. But I figured they could be in the mix for a playoff berth as long as their defense keeps them in it, and whoever starts at quarterback, they just do their job. Wrapping up the final part of our 2024 NFL season preview month is the team that's looking to make unprecedented history in the NFL this coming fall. And that team is none other than the reigning, defending, undisputed, back-to-back Super Bowl champions. And that team is the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs last year, even though they won the AFC West once again, and they got back to the postseason dance in 2023, things were looking pretty bleak for them because they had some serious glaring issues on offense that just didn't want to go away, and it seriously threatened their playoff chances and a chance at a repeat. But the playoffs came around, and the Chiefs flipped the switch for a run that they'd never done before under Patrick Mahomes. And after dispatching of the Miami Dolphins, they had to go through two things, again, that they'd never done before with Mahomes. And that was 2 road playoff games against the Bills and against the Ravens. They successfully done both to get back to the Super Bowl and put their title on the line against a familiar foe in the San Francisco 49ers. This time around, they had to go through overtime to once again put a capper on the 49ers, and they successfully did what they needed to do, and that was repeat as Super Bowl champions, something that has never been done before until now, and the first time that they've done it since a 2003-04 New England Patriots. So some people are saying dynasty, other people are saying, oh, it was something else. But nonetheless, the Chiefs are your back-to-back Super Bowl champions, and they're clearly have one thing in mind going into this 2024 season, and that's the mantra, a certain mantra that goes by this: eat, sleep, conquer, the repeat. Something that has never been done before in the history of the National Football League, and that is win 3 consecutive Super Bowls. So the Chiefs clearly have something in play here, and they clearly could do that, but there were some things in the offseason that were threatening their chances of a three-peat. Before the offseason started, well before training camp started. So there were certain controversial things that happened during their offseason that could have put that in trouble. Like receiver Rashee Rice, a key piece of that offense, he was facing charges for causing a big highway crash in a Dallas highway. And then you had offensive lineman Wayne Morris and Chukwuebuka Jason Godric being arrested for some weed. And then you got edge rusher Isaiah Buggs facing 2 misdemeanor charges for animal cruelty. And then he ended up getting released sometime later, but it didn't matter too much for the Chiefs because he was a reserve player anyway. But nonetheless, these were like some distractions from the team. And let's also not forget Harrison Butker making some controversial comments at a commencement speech. So either way, these were some like big distractions for a team trying to do something that has never been done before in the history of the NFL. Some other things that happened with this team during the offseason, well, they traded away their best corner on the team, which was L'Jarius Sneed, to the Tennessee Titans. They clearly couldn't afford to pay him. They franchise tagged him, but they couldn't come to an agreement to a long-term deal. So they shipped him off to the Titans. So they tried to get him paid there. They also re-signed a couple of key players like Mecole Hardman and defensive tackle Chris Jones, because it's been well known that Chris Jones was trying to get paid, but unfortunately he didn't until this past offseason. So some of the moves that they made in this past offseason in free agency, they didn't really lose too much, but they also didn't really gain a whole lot in terms of free agency. They lost one of their key reserve linemen in Nick Algretti to Washington. They also lost one of the reserve linebackers in Willie Gay to the New Orleans Saints, and safety Mike Edwards to the Bills. But they did get a key piece of their into their offense, and that key piece was receiver Marquise Hollywood Brown. And it was a little unfortunate that Hollywood Brown didn't pan out for Arizona, even though Arizona traded for him a little while back. But he gets another chance here to try and reinvent himself with one of the best, if not, no, the best quarterback in the NFL, and that's Patrick Mahomes. So it'll be interesting how that works out. But the work at receiver still needs to be done in the draft, and that was getting another one in receiver Xavier Worthy from Texas, and continuing to build around the offensive line. Gained one in Kingsley Sumaitaya from BYU, and center Hunter Nourzad from Penn State, and then another one in CJ Hansen from Holy Cross in the much later rounds of the draft. And then they continue to beef up some parts of their defense, like safety Jaden Hicks from Washington State and corner Kamal Hayden from Tennessee. So when you look at this Chiefs offseason and what they need to do, sure, the distractions were in the way, but the offensive woes from last year, those shouldn't be too much of an issue this year. Because whatever happens with Rashee Rice and his legal issues, at least Patrick Mahomes is going to have a pair of downfield threats that he's already getting along with in Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy. Because last year, Patrick Mahomes, other than Rashee Rice, didn't have nobody. He didn't have anyone to go through other than Rashee Rice, who ended up not catching on until late in the year. And then, of course, Travis Kelce, his main go-to guy since Mahomes entered the league. So that Kelce-Mahomes connection is still going to be the same, but there is some concern with Kelce's age because he does turn 35 in October, and there was a little bit of dip in production in the regular season, but he still performs well in the playoffs. But having those downfield threats in Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy is going to make Patrick Mahomes probably an even better quarterback than he is now. So, yeah, it'll be interesting how that works out. And they also did get another a tight end to maybe be mentored by Kelce and be maybe even groomed by him. Meanwhile, the offensive line, although it wasn't addressed all that much, rookie tackle Kingston Sumaida could be pretty helpful once he gets more experience. So we'll see how that works out. And then going to the other side of the ball, the passing defense. They again have a few question marks because now that L'Jarius Sneed is now in Tennessee, that they have to turn to the likes of Josh Williams and Jalen Watson to replace him. With Josh Williams, he hasn't played a whole lot. He was drafted in 2022, but he hasn't had a lot of playing time because of L'Jarius Sneed and Jalen Watson. With Watson, he had a lot last year as a rotational player, and he was frequently burned a lot, unfortunately. But he's got to step into the starting role with Sneed gone. So figure standout Trent McDuffie in the slot to do a lot of heavy lifting with this cornerback group. So when you look at some of the key games for the Chiefs' back-to-back title defense tour, it starts out with two of their last AFC Championship opponents, hosting the Baltimore Ravens in the opening kickoff of the season, and then week 2 against the Cincinnati Bengals, who are hoping that they'll stay healthy for their own run. And then week 4, in the second game of your road trip, you get to face the LA Chargers and their kind of new look team with their new head coach, Jim Harbaugh. And then much later down the line in week 7, you face the 49ers in a rematch in San Francisco. So that'll be an interesting game. That'll be an interesting game for both teams, and who knows what'll happen there. So I don't really have a lot of questions for this team because we know what they're capable of. We know what they can accomplish. They've very much accomplished the repeat feat this past year. We know what Patrick Mahomes is capable of. We know what Andy Reid is capable of. I mean, there are a couple question marks with the passing defense, and then some questions with the offensive line, and maybe even a little bit at receiver. So the only thing that I can really question with this team, in all honesty, is what stops them? What really stops them from accomplishing the unprecedented, other than maybe the other teams in the AFC? Who knows? Who really knows? So for the Kansas City Chiefs, they're coming off their first Super Bowl repeat in nearly 20 years. And they actually managed to improve their team this past offseason. Like, the woes of last year are seemingly gone for now with the additions at receiver and hopefully better blocking up front for Mahomes. So when you think about it, as long as everyone stays healthy, especially Patrick Mahomes, and Andy Reid continues to coach well, I think the Chiefs can do something that no other team has ever done before. Eat, sleep, conquer, three-peat a Super Bowl. And, well, let's be honest. The only thing stopping them from a trip to New Orleans in February next year is, well, themselves. That is a wrap on our 2024 NFL season preview month. In this episode, we've covered the final 4 teams in this month, and that includes the Los Angeles Chargers, the Denver Broncos, the Las Vegas Raiders, and the Kansas City Chiefs, which put the final bow in our season preview month. 8 divisions, 32 teams in the span of July, all ready to go into the next month as we prepare for preseason football and then eventually the real action, which is the regular season in September. So let me ask you this, you guys. Did my NFL season preview month make you guys ready for NFL football or make you less ready for NFL football going into September? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below and on YouTube, and then send me a message on social media, on Twitter and Instagram with your takes on, well, overall, this NFL season previews. I'd like to know your feedback. I'd like to know like how I did and with my filthy casual takes on all these teams, including these 4 with the Chiefs, the Raiders, the Broncos, and the Chargers. And yeah, let's have a conversation about it as long as we're respectful, civil, and even jokingly as well. And yeah, let's have a fun conversation about all 32 teams that we talked about this month in YouTube comments, DMs, what have you. You can slide into them DMs about our season previews here. But again, thank you all so much for tuning in into our NFL season preview month this year. It was a lot of fun to do. A lot of prep work, a lot of fun to do as well. But yeah, that is a wrap on our season previews. And I'm looking forward to the NFL season this fall, which comes up real soon, real soon, in over a month. Time flies by real fast. So for the next episode for the month of August, well, I don't know, man. You'll just have to stay tuned in until we get to the NFL season, and who knows how I'm going to cover the NFL season this fall. But for now, for the month of August, you will get, for my wrestling fans out there, and even for my football fans that are wrestling fans out there, or maybe not, there will be a SummerSlam review. SummerSlam is coming up sometime soon. So you'll get my SummerSlam 2024 pay-per-view review. And who knows, you might even get some retrospective reviews maybe down the pipeline for SummerSlam, which is always tied to the month of August. But you shall see. We shall see how things go. But for now, you will get a SummerSlam review coming up in maybe the next episode of Very Cold Lasagna, but we'll see. But for now, until that time comes, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Very Cold Lasagna, episode number 210 of this icy yet spicy podcast for all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports. Again, thank you for tuning in to all month long my NFL season preview month for 2024. I have been your host, DylanLasagna. Thank you for tuning in to my filthy casual takes on the world of sports. And until the next episode of Very Cold Lasagna, peace out.